Hey everyone! In this video, I want to talk about what I think is the real sleeper feature in CSM 10.1. And this feature is the HTTP request one-step sub-action. I think it's a sleeper feature because I think it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities and just it makes any interaction with any API you could possibly want to interact with just super trivial. Basically, it is the most, it's the epitome of you want to do it, we'll let you do it. And basically, it's as raw as you can get. Obviously, behind the classic no-code interface that Cherwell has always provided, but it provides as much customizability as you could possibly want from an HTTP request. So let's dive into the rich client and see what it looks like. So, of course, this isn't a one-step, so I'm going to go into the one-step manager. In my demo folder, I'll create a new one-step. Let's call it HTTP request. And now it's down here under advanced actions. HTTP request. It's down by, if you saw my previous video, the run an action block sub-action. So let's just drag an HTTP request action over to the canvas and let's see what kind of functionality we have here. So we can specify a method. This would be post, put, get, let's see, what else is available? Post, get, put, patch, delete. So, you know, all your usual REST methods. The URL makes sense. The body, this would be the request body. And then headers. So we'll get to exactly what headers are useful for in a minute. But let's move on. Response. So this is what you might expect if you're familiar with the web service action. So you can store the result as a variable, store the return code, 200 in the case of success, maybe 404 in the case of not found, 500 in the case of server error, that sort of thing. Store the return code in a variable, and then store the response headers in a variable. So these say request, that shouldn't be the case. That should actually be response. So I think it just says HTTP request because that's what I've named my HTTP request step. So slightly confusing, but don't worry, this is on the response tab. So these are all the responses: result, return code, and response headers. Then on advanced, we can ignore certificate errors. So if you're talking to a server that has a self-signed certificate or might at some point have an expired certificate, but you still want to do the communication, you can check that box. And then you can store the raw request or the raw response as a variable. So let's actually create one of these. So let's say we want to post to a URL. Now, I thought about a bunch of different things I could do, but in the end I decided to just use a generic, just kind of a REST testing site for this. So we actually have requestbin.net. And basically what it is it creates an endpoint for you and then just shows you everything that gets sent to that endpoint. So I'll go ahead and create a request bin. I'll make it private, only viewable from this browser. I don't plan on sending anything particularly sensitive, but in your testing, you might want to test with actual data, in which case you don't want this going anywhere. So create a request bin, and here's my request bin URL. So let's copy that, and if you are a programmer, you can see all sorts of examples here, but obviously since we're using Cherwell's no-code platform, we do not need to use any code. So let's go back into Sharewell, paste that into URL. One thing to note here is that it is completely tokenizable. So anything you might want to put in, any text field, from system functions to a prompt to other variables from previous steps in the one step, stored values, that sort of thing. Stored values might be helpful if you have a custom endpoint from a service that's multi-tenant, or you have a specific domain for a service that's stored in a stored value. Especially useful if you're building a map, right? If you want other people to be able to use it, but the URL might be slightly different for every particular customer that uses it. This parameterization here is going to be super helpful. Same thing applies to the body. So let's do something simple like a little JSON body, and let's say current date, and then let's drop a token in there for current date time. Right? That makes sense. So now let's go over to headers. And what might we want to put here? The most important header that you want to put here is going to be content type. So content type. And now in this case, I'm using JSON. So the content type would be application/JSON. Some of the commonly used content types would be text XML for XML, obviously application JSON for JSON. If you're just doing plain text, you can do text plain. Most REST APIs do care at least somewhat about content type. You might be dealing with an API that doesn't at all care about content type. It just assumes that the request body is in the right format, in which case you might not need this header. But my personal recommendation would be, if you know what content type you're using, throw the content type header in here just to be on the safe side. Just in case, somewhere down the road, the API upgrades and all of a sudden it has stricter expectations or something like that. So that's useful there. And then response, we won't actually care about any of this for this demo, but these work exactly the same way as with the web request. What is it? Call a web service one-step action. So let's just say OK. There's our new one step. Let's go ahead and run it. So it runs and it's done. So now let's go over to request bin and see what we've got. So we actually have to refresh this page, and we see we've gotten one request. Here's the body, which makes sense. That's what we put in there, current date, and then the result from that system function. And now we get some headers. Most of these are not the ones that we put in there. So where is the one that we put in there? It was right here. It's the content type, application JSON. Right? Okay, so now let's make this a little bit more complex. Let's say you're talking to an API, and that API requires some form of authentication, right? As most APIs do, most REST APIs do. So let's go back into our one step, and let's edit this HTTP request as if we were logging into an API that required some authentication. Right? So we'll leave the body the same, we'll leave the URL the same, but over in headers, what we'll do is we'll add a new header, X access token, and I'm just using this header name as an example. Your API might use a different header. It might just be access token. It might be authorization, and then bearer, and then you might pull your access token from a stored value or something like that. Different APIs work slightly differently, but most of them use some form of a header to pull out whatever the access token is. So let's just pretend that X access token is the name of our access token header. And we'll type in some gibberish. In reality, this would be an actual access token, which you probably got from a previous HTTP request. You can save that. You can save that as JSON, then you can parse out the JSON. If you want me to show that, leave a comment below. I'd be happy to show that, but that's a little bit outside the scope of this HTTP request, how to extract things from JSON. I think I actually may have shown how to do that in a previous video. If I can remember what video that was, I'll leave a link in the description, but I'm not entirely sure. Okay, so we have our access token, and let's call it good, and let's run that one step and refresh our request bin. Okay, so here's our second request. You can see later date time. So here's the first one, 1:41 p.m., 1:45 p.m. Okay, so now we should have our X access token, easy for me to say, header with the value that we provided. If we wanted to get a little bit more complicated even, we can go back to one-step manager, edit our one-step, and you can of course add form values, that sort of thing. Speaking of form values, back in headers, in content type, there is another one which I can never remember what it is when I'm trying to use it, but I will look it up and I'll leave it on the screen below. The content type that gets sent across when you submit a web form. So if you're pretending that Cherwell is submitting a web form like from a web browser, that would be the content type that you would use, and then your body would, instead of being JSON, it would look like val1 equals value and val2 equals other value, that sort of thing. That's what it would look like if you were pretending to submit a form. Whatever that is, I'll leave the content type down below because I don't remember what it is. Okay, so there we go. Let's see what this does. Let's go ahead and run that, and as soon as it's done, we'll pull up request bin here, and I'm watching done. Okay. Refresh. Okay, application JSON. Yep. Okay. Here's the post and query string, val1 value. Right. If we were using the content type that's for the form, the HTML form type, we see those showing up here. Since we're doing JSON, we see it show up down here in raw body. So yeah, so that's how to use the new HTTP request one-step action in CSM 10.1. So if you have any questions about that, go ahead and leave a comment below. I think this is really cool. I'm really excited to actually get a chance to use this. I'm actually probably going to take my my Twilio SMS message map and rewrite it, not only to take advantage of the HTTP request sub-action, but also action blocks. Because right now in that map I'm using the using 2.1 steps that share data the same way that I showed in a previous video, which I'll leave linked down below as well. So with that in mind, that's basically it for this video. If you liked what you saw here, go ahead and click that like button. Subscribe to the channel, because I'll be posting a lot of stuff like this. I've pretty much covered all the exciting features in 10.1, at least from my perspective. I have gotten a couple questions on some of my previous videos, so I'll be doing a little bit deeper dive on some aspects of those features. But by and large, I'll probably be doing more videos on features that were introduced either in earlier versions or have been in Cherwell, as long as I can remember, as long as most people can remember, that are really powerhouse features that are not to be overlooked. If you have a particular feature that you want me to do a video on, go ahead and leave a comment below or shoot me an email, and I'll put it on the list and do a video on it in, as soon as I can. I've been posting 2 videos a week. My goal is to post at least 1 video a week on Wednesdays, but it's been 2 videos, one on Monday, one on Wednesday. So definitely subscribe and stay tuned for all those videos. Thanks for watching.